I never doubted that Saddam Hussein would have to be forced out of Kuwait. And I saw the Iraqi Army as a formidable enemy, hardened by the 8 years of war with Iran and equipped with the weaponry that Iraq's oil wealth had enabled Saddam to amass. MiG-29s, Scud missiles, T-72s, heavy artillery that outranged our own, radars and communication systems that were as good as, and in some cases better than ours. They were a significant force by any standards. My confidence in our ability to defeat the Iraqis centered on three things. Firstly, our doctrine of the air-land battle that we had all trained for and understood. Secondly, our fine troops and equipment that enabled us to pursue that doctrine to its inevitable conclusion, victory. And finally, the sheer knowledge that our cause was just and supported by the entire world.
By the beginning of February 1991, all units of the British 1st Armoured Division are concentrated in Assembly Area Keys, and the division is under the tactical control of the US Army's 7th Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Frederick Franks.
Well, we knew from reading history, from study of previous desert campaigns, that three things seemed to be dominant in warfare in the desert, and particularly from the early 40s and other desert campaigns. Control of the air, logistics, and maneuver warfare. We knew we would have control of the air. We knew with a lot of hard work from our soldiers and the leadership that the logistics would be there and would keep up. And so it was a matter of maneuver warfare in the desert. As a matter of fact, the warfare in the desert resembled almost war at sea, maneuvering fleets because the terrain really was no obstacle to movement. And so with the ability to navigate in the desert that our forces had, we could take our fleet wherever we wanted and mass it at a particular point. The Iraqis, by contrast, chose to take their fleet to sea and anchor it, essentially anchor it in place.
When war started, the division, as a division, had done no training whatsoever. 7th Brigade was ready to go and had gone through another set of training exercises on the Devil Dog Dragoon Ranges. 4th Brigade was still working up. The artillery and the engineers, because of the late shipping, were falling behind the program that we had designed back in December, and the logistic units had hardly trained at all because they had been committed to carrying out their primary function almost on arrival.
Collectively, we had very little time for training, except as we ran up to the ground campaign, we carried out a series of study days, map exercises and so on, so that we had the interface between my own organisation and the division absolutely right, so that we were working to a common set of SOPs, and so everybody knew exactly what they were going to do in terms of support for the division during operations. We carried out a great deal of individual training, of course, because the NBC threat was ever present, and indeed we were uncertain of whether there was a ground threat to the LFC going to materialise, because we had no rear area security force, and so we had to make sure that we could defend ourselves in the rear areas.
I deployed the logistic units into the field in the desert, but then they straight away went behind the major task of getting the logistic support for Operation Desert Sabre set up. And we were not really able to train collectively until we all got together as a division in area Keys in early February. It was as late as that. It was very important that we did get together, because not only is there the need to practice the close links between units at first line and their second line support, but it's also very important that the division administrative area as a whole is given a chance to manoeuvre and learn the details and the drills necessary to do that in a fast and efficient way. The GOC had instituted at the outset a series of map exes which had involved all commanding officers, both arms and logistics COs. I extended that with a series of logistic study periods based on the same scenarios, but going down to echelon commanders, to bringing in our third line support from the FMA and so on, so that we were all working off a common hymn sheet in terms of the drills and the way we were going to conduct operations and the logistic support for them.
General Smith insisted, as after he moved from the East Coast into the tactical assembly area, he wanted to conduct a full-up rehearsal of the actual passage of lines through the U.S. 1st Infantry Division, as he would later have to execute. So we built an obstacle system that mirror-imaged the obstacle system the Iraqis had. Our 1st Infantry Division conducted a practice breach assault, and then General Smith passed the entire division through this in the lanes similar to what would happen later. Did it during the same type of time of day that he had anticipated passing through the actual breach. The second thing that General Smith wanted to do was, as he moved from east to west, was move in the same tactical formations and using the same tactics from east to west that he had planned to use to attack the 52nd Division. And so we wanted to try to accommodate that, and we were able to do that. And again, this was example of the cooperation, the command relationship I believe we had.
Joint training was absolutely vital for us. A passage of lines is, after all, one of the most complex operations of war. And it was very clear that we would need to discuss with the 1st Infantry Division MEC exactly how we were going to go about it. The two divisional commanders had decided that what we would do is run a joint study day, and that was the first step in what was to be a very carefully contrived series of training days which ran through. We started with this joint study day where one got to know, and most importantly, as it subsequently turned out, one's opposite number. In my case, I met Colonel David Wiseman, who is the commander of the 3rd Brigade. We then subsequently had the two divisional FTXs exercise Dib-Dibber Drive, where the whole division practiced the passage of lines with the 1st Infantry Division MEC and did it by night. For us, this was absolutely vital. We identified all sorts of shortcomings as a result of exercise Dib-Dibber Drive.
The first divisional exercise was splendidly chaotic and expected to be so. But the fact that one moved through the night, got into a position to bring fire support down as a complete regiment was tremendously boosting to the confidence. What we tried not to do was to overface anybody at this stage.
The important thing that I thought that the divisional commander did was that he made all of the training that we executed directly relevant to the plan. And so everything that we did, we felt as though that was what we were actually going to be doing for real. And as it so turned out, that's exactly what happened. And the actual operation was very much like the exercise.
The second divisional exercise, Dib-Dibber Charge, is a night maneuver under operational conditions, conducted during the move west into concentration area Ray, during which the organizational mobility of the division is tested to the full, as regrouping of units is practiced between the brigades.
It was very much procedural training. The way the divisional commander had worked out his plans, the two brigades launched sequentially, where if and when we were going to go into Iraq, would operate in a way that we had trained and worked up and run ourselves, and therefore we were to be left alone. But this formation training, as I say, was procedural and was mainly due to how could you do a passage of lines and indeed pass one battle group to another, for instance, should one brigade need to be reinforced for a particular operation. But of course that procedural training was absolutely essential to the smooth running and getting the operation underway.
In early February, after months of detailed planning and intensive training, the coalition forces are poised to launch the ground offensive.
we were not prepared to commence a land battle until there was adequate forces in theatre to overwhelm the enemy. There was going to be no ratcheting up, as we'd seen so frequently in campaigns in the past. We'd got to have a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and when we felt we were in that position, we were going to go.
There were various factors at the sort of higher levels, at the operational levels, that I felt I had to consider. And these were going to dictate how I, in broad terms, was going to fight the division. The first factor was that I was commanding the British Army in the field. Only I could reinforce success or failure. Reinforcements could only be trickled to me. And therefore I had to fight the division in such a way that I could get myself out of the hole, and secondly, that I could be in at the end game.
The air war, meanwhile, is pursued relentlessly round the clock, with up to 2,000 combat sorties being flown each day by coalition air forces.
The battle for air supremacy and the attrition by our air forces of the Iraqi war machine cost the lives of young airmen. But it prepared the way for the land offensive that wrote a new chapter in the textbooks of maneuver warfare that will never be forgotten.
By mid-February, the principal objective of the continuing air offensive is the preparation of the battlefield, and in particular, the destruction of Iraqi artillery prior to the start of the land battle.
But as we move towards the land battle itself, there was a slight dilemma, or an air of uncertainty, in that a vast amount of effort had been put into the preparation of the land battle. I mean, very quickly there were F-16s, A-10s, AV-8s, the Harriers, the C-130 gunships, day and night, the B-52s, relentless, continuous, 24-hour pounding of the Iraqi army. And every judgment in military terms told us that really nobody could have sustained that sort of punishment over a period of nearly 6 weeks and offer the opposition which their numbers suggested they would be capable of doing.
The artillery raids were linked with the fourth phase of the air campaign. Now, our prime targets at that stage were the Iraqi artillery batteries. He had a huge number of batteries. He outnumbered us with his guns considerably, and he outranged us. So the artillery raids were designed to begin to reduce his superiority in numbers.
The artillery raids begin on February the 18th, all coalition land forces now being in position for the start of the ground offensive. At sea, as on land, the heavy guns are poised, ready for a relentless bombardment of the Iraqi defenses.
The entire business that we were much given over to, which was applying heavy pressure on the right flank of operations against Kuwait, saw, I think, two primary areas of contribution. One was in guaranteeing the sea area domination, clearing the Iraqi Navy from those waters, where the Lynx and the Sea Skewer combination provided a remarkable, I think, in terms of their numerical balance as against achievement, a remarkable contribution. They, between themselves, destroyed a quarter of all the Iraqi surface vessels, particularly those with missiles, the fast patrol craft. We also had 4 ships which were packed with 1st Armoured Division ammunition that in the event of sustained land fighting, they would have been in, I hope, the optimum position to place their vital cargoes on shore in precisely the right place to make rapid use of it. We also had the Royal Fleet Auxiliary Argus, which had a first-rate hospital and highly capable medical staff on board, right up in the front line against Kuwait, where again she could have been used extensively and was used to a degree with maritime operations. And the final contribution, I believe, we made, undoubtedly, was in the clearing of that swept water up against the Kuwaiti coast to allow the battleships first to go in and plant their fire into Kuwait, and allowed the possible platform for amphibious assault, which so deluded the Iraqis in the outcome.
The reports that we had from an aircraft overhead that reported several battery positions badly damaged and some tanks destroyed, it must have created exactly the effect that we wanted at this stage, which is to destroy his long-range systems.
We deployed completely on radio silence away from the concentration area, which was some 4 or 5 kilometres south of the border. We deploy right up to the border, usually laterally, attack targets pre-planned on radio silence, minimum crews, engage up to 3 targets within 15 minutes, and then move, and if it was necessary to engage further targets, to redeploy. And I reckon that if we fired and moved within 15 minutes, he would be doing quite well to fire back in that time.
We would move forward in a fairly tightly controlled fashion to take up our positions close to the border berm, and it would be a tight regimental deployment with the regiment deployed in an area radius about 1,000 metres. It would all be done on radio silence, so it would be very carefully staged in terms of the orders we'd pass to the launchers before they actually occupied the position, and then at the given hour they would let loose their rockets. It would be an extraordinarily impressive sight.
The coalition will give Saddam Hussein until noon Saturday to do what he must do: begin his immediate and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait.
The time of most concern, I found, was just before going through the breach. We heard on CNN News that Saddam Hussein had agreed, under Russian pressure, to pull out of Kuwait. And of course there was a feeling of enormous euphoria at the time, because I cannot believe that many of us wanted actually to go into Iraq and do the business. I mean, some people inevitably wanted to see what it was like, and professionally I think a lot of us would like to have just seen what it was like, but a tremendous sense after very nearly 5 months out there of relief. And then 3 hours later we discovered that that in fact was not the reality of the situation. And that evening and the next day, I think, were my hardest days of all out there, because morale went down very definitely at that stage and played enormously with our emotions. And the next day, as I say, I did find it very difficult going around trying to persuade people to get back up to the normal high state of morale.
I tried to gear myself to when I thought we were going to cross the start line, and began to sort of psych them up. Investigating and discussing battlefield stress, and then beginning to go through the interpretation of the Geneva Convention, which still allowed the widespread destruction of Iraqi forces. It was also at that point important to make sure that everybody realized that everybody had to kill Iraqis, and that it was no good just hanging back, doing your job by reporting things on the radio, but yet you had to maneuver yourself into a position where you could join in. It was very important to get everybody involved and to begin to work up an aggressiveness that was going to see us through the campaign.
G-Day is set for February the 24th, 1991. At 0100 hours, Marsent forces commenced their attack across the Saudi border into Kuwait, while in the west, the 6th French Daguet Division, with a brigade of the US 82nd Airborne Division under command, begins a rapid initial advance to cover the western flank of the coalition attack. At 0740 hours, the US 101st Airborne Division launches the largest heli-borne operation of all time, involving around 300 assault and transport helicopters to establish a forward operating base 50 miles inside Iraq.
The point of main effort initially for the Corps was to breach the Iraqi defenses at a place where it was the weakest, which was their 26th Division, and then immediately pass the 1st UK Armored Division, Brigades 4 and 7, through the breach to attack the tactical reserves. And then, when the success of that appeared to be assured, then shift the point of main effort to the enveloping force, which was a cavalry regiment and 2 armored divisions, which were coming around the outside, taking advantage of a gap in the Iraqi defenses to mass against the Republican Guards.
At 1000 hours on the morning of G-Day, General Rupert Smith holds his O Group at Divisional Main HQ to confirm the final details of the plan.
Explain the organisation, if you like, of the battlefield as I have planned it to date for our subsequent operations once we have passed through 1ID. There was no ground of any tactical significance whatsoever. There was no ground, in other words, to be fought for, and any enemy who chose to sit on the ground and could be immobilised there, either by their own volition or by the measures that we might take, could be ignored. I wanted to fight the division in depth, and I wanted to achieve for my brigades objectives which I called bite-sized objectives. I wanted them to be able to consume these very quickly and be ready to move on. In this way, I would achieve tempo, while I fought, using my Commander Royal Artillery and his artillery group, a depth battle to isolate that contact battle by destroying, disrupting, delaying the enemy, using the artillery and any air that we had allocated. The artillery commander needed to have information on which to fight his battle. And to this end, I grouped the medium reconnaissance regiment with the artillery group. I also grouped the aviation regiment with them for information gathering on the one hand and the ability to use their weapons on the other.
The divisional commander wanted something that would be able to strike in front of the brigades, and that's where aviation was initially going to be employed. The recce screen 16th 5th would go out way forward, 60 to 100 k's possibly, in front of the main brigade locations. And we would support them, either with reconnaissance or with anti-tank fire. And also we're capable of fighter-ground attack, although that actually proved very, very difficult out there. And artillery direction. Now again, with the artillery direction, we were outstripping the range of the guns, but we could control MLRS to a degree.
In the British divisional area, the objectives are allocated metallic code names. Those to the north are to be attacked by the 7th Armoured Brigade, those to the south by the 4th Armoured Brigade. A series of phase lines will coordinate the advance within the overall corps plan. At 0530 hours on G-Day, the US 1st Mechanized Infantry Division attacks the Iraqi frontline defences to create the breach through which British forces will pass. The initial Iraqi response to the coalition assault along the entire length of their defences is poor. Where significant resistance is encountered, it quickly crumbles. Attrition by air bombardment and artillery raids, the low morale of Iraqi frontline troops, and the fact that surprise is achieved all contribute to this early success. One result of which is to bring forward H hour for the 1st Armoured Division to 0800 hours on G+1, 12 hours ahead of the original plan.
With the timings being brought forward and suddenly the picture being clear that there was a clear run or likely to be a clear run, 7th Brigade were told to go through the breach first, and the whole plan was brought forward some 12 hours. And it's a wonderful way to go to war, because we thought we were going to go on to tank transporters and move up to the final staging area, but nothing like that happened. We all had to drive because of the rush to get there. And nobody had any time to think this is it, because we were also busy getting ready for this is it in a way that we hadn't expected to do so. From a purely staff college point of view, the appreciation and plans, I must have had about 3/4 of an hour to actually do an appreciation and plan of my 1st Brigade attack.
Entering Iraq was for me quite a remarkable experience. I think, first of all, what you've got to understand is the conditions under which we were going forward. It was that day, a reasonably sunny day still, and there were these enormous great highways. It was like driving up a road which the American engineers had prepared. And as I motored up this, rumbled up in this very slow-moving column, I came across the Iraqi border berm, and on the side of it was a large painted sign which said, "You are now entering Iraq by courtesy of the 1st Infantry Division Mech," the big red one. But this feeling of elation was overtaken by a feeling of awe at what I actually saw. Because everywhere one looked, there were just vehicles. There were columns of tanks moving slowly across. There were American engineers working hard at clearing the areas off to one side, lifting mines. There were tired Americans sleeping just where they lay. There were regiments of MLRS firing. The scale of the whole thing was quite awe-inspiring.
The forming-up point for the commencement of the first attacks is Phase Line, New Jersey. 7 brigades' immediate objectives are copper, location of an important enemy communications centre, and zinc.
The Irish Hussars comprised 3 squadrons, and we were to lead 7 Brigade. 7 Brigade was to lead the division. And so when we broke out from New Jersey, we knew that there was no one in front of us. Now, I was very anxious that we should break out in as best condition in terms of resupply and replenishment as possible. And so I had the A1s follow up very closely behind squadrons, and we managed to refuel all the squadrons just before they set off.
The brigade formed up round about Phase Line, New Jersey, under the shelter of the American bridgehead late in the afternoon. And from there we then broke out with the 2 armoured regiments up, and as far as I recall, the Stafford's battle group back. A task that was quickly given to the Scots Dragoon Guards battle group was to find, fix, and then destroy communications or headquarter site. We didn't know what it was at the time, and the instructions were pretty vague. We were just given a block of grid squares to go and find it. At this time, that was difficult to do because visibility was pretty poor. It was late in the afternoon, and there was a certain amount of jostling between the Irish Hussars and ourselves because of the frontages, which were much smaller than we had initially anticipated to achieve the concentration to break through.
The Irish Hussars encounter only minimal resistance from Iraqi troops in their advance up to and through objective Copper, but they bypass the communications centre, which now lies directly in the path of the Scots Dragoon Guards.
Once the communications site was found, in fact, by D Squadron, who were on our right, the commanding officer then gave orders that D Squadron and the company were to deal with it, leaving the other 2 squadrons, A and C Squadron, to provide flank and indeed frontal protection so that action could carry on in isolation. As you can appreciate, at night time in a very flat, featureless desert, the position was particularly difficult to find, and had it not been for a very prominent radio communications tower, we probably wouldn't have found it at all until we had ended up in it.
I was the first person to find the position because the rest of the squadron had passed on by due to the dark and the rain. I received orders from the squadron leader over the radio to lead the company of Staffords into the centre of the communications position. As we advanced, I was some 500 metres in front of them, talking to them constantly over the radio. When we got to about 1,000 metres from the position, the Iraqi infantry opened up on us with small arms fire. I returned that fire with small arms and also main armament rounds, destroying the vehicles that were on the centre of the position.
At 300 metres, exactly as we planned, the tanks slowed. We pulled ahead past them using the sort of warrior speed to pull ahead of them, and the chain guns and the cannons started up on automatic. So we had a good wave of fire going in, and I knew the 3 platoon off to the right had located their target and was going in towards them with their own tank. As the platoons reached the forward edge of the enemy position, I gave the order to debus. And at that stage, the driver slams his anchors on, and the gun was then pouring fire into the direction of the enemy position. It's a real battle to get out of the back. The Warrior's not designed to allow the commander to debus with ease. And the problems of physically getting yourself out of the turret, getting deconnected, finding your way through the chaos in the back, piling out of the back door. At that stage, I met up with my company sergeant major, my radio operator, and my runner. I was handing my rifle, just made sure that everything I had was in the correct place, and then we set off around the corner of the vehicle towards the enemy position. As I came around the corner, my first impression was the blazing vehicle, the blazing generator still running. We couldn't see any enemy at that stage, but I could see the platoon on the left starting to fight their way through into the position, through a series of bunkers. There was an awful lot of fire going down from the platoons themselves, from the Warriors' chain guns, and again from the tanks on either flank. And I could see over to my right-hand side 3 platoon fighting through their position. As the platoon cleared through the position, it became clear there was no enemy actually still remaining in that area, but there was a position in depth. It was about 200 metres further on. The platoon could see it quite clearly and started to put fire down. At that stage, I ordered them to provide covering fire, and we then started to move the reserve platoon in round the left flank. They came in using the mast as a reference point, picked up an intimate support tank, and moved in then to assault the position in depth.
And we were firing away at these bunkers and trenches. I got up, we did the second bound, started running forward, and somebody put some shmoolies or light up like, and I got hit in the chest from the trench that I was running at. I was going to grenade it. And all of a sudden there was a flash come from this enemy trench, and it felt as though I'd just been running to a brick wall and punched in the chest, and I went straight onto my back. And it was then I was thinking, Jesus, like I've been hit. I waited, I checked myself over first, see if I was alright. I was alright, and then I got back up and carried on the attack. And the section commander by this time had taken out the trench with grenades, and it was a trench come bunker. And it had been taken out by phosphorus grenades, so we couldn't get in there to check if there was anyone alive or dead. And then later on, I found out that I'd been hit by an Iraqi bullet, and he took my combination tool and ricocheted down into my magazine.
We cleared all the bunkers, rounded up a few prisoners. They were coming out, they'd had enough, white flags were flying. I was identifying the prisoners, telling the platoon commander he was sending people out to get them. We all reimbursed, formed up as a company and took the prisoners to a central area, and away we went on our travels again.
While the Scots Dragoon Guards battle group, with its company from the Staffords, are still engaged in this action to clear the communications site on Copper, the Irish Hussars are moving into position for their assault on Zinc, which was believed to be the location of a brigade headquarters. Resistance on Zinc, however, is light, and the battle groups of the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars and Staffords make rapid progress through the early hours of G+2, the 26th of February.
By the time we got to the 36th easting, we reckoned that we'd probably chanced our arm enough, and so we paused, waiting for first light, and then planning to go forward. We hadn't paused for more than about 20 minutes, and 1 or 2 guys were trying to get their heads down within the vehicles, when I heard very clearly over the air D Squadron reporting hotspots coming towards them from the northeast. First of all 12, then 20, and finally a number of about 56. So I pushed D Squadron up into a position from which they could engage, and it was a very tense 20-25 minutes as they manoeuvred to get up there.
They were approaching the squadron from the northeast, and knowing that there was no other friendly forces to our front, I asked the commanding officer if we could move forward and engage the hotspots. The visibility was very poor at this stage. There was a mixture of driving sand and rain, and our togs and lasers were very badly degraded. However, we got a range of about 2,000 metres, and knowing that there was no one in front of us, we began to engage. The gunnery was difficult, but we soon started scoring hits on the enemy, although we still could not identify what they were. Very quickly, what we thought was this counterattack began to move away from us, and the range rapidly increased. After about 25 minutes, I ordered the squadron to stop firing, and our last rounds were fired by my gunnery sergeant at 5.5 kilometres. At that stage, we stopped firing, and until dawn, we merely looked to our front, but were unable to see anything else.
By first light on G+2, 7 brigades, 3 battle groups have each secured their objectives on copper and zinc. Meanwhile, 4 Brigade, having crossed phase line New Jersey 4.5 hours after 7 Brigade, are tasked, in the case of the 14th 20th Hussars, to advance due east in order to get into position for a night attack on objective Brass, while the Royal Scots attack Bronze, with the Fusiliers battle group in reserve.
I was determined that the brigade would cross the line of departure in an asymmetric formation. By that I mean with the 14th 20th leading, and then slightly behind would be the Royal Scots, about half an hour behind, because I was convinced that if we met anything, it would always come at us from the north, and I always wanted to protect. I felt very vulnerable with my armoured infantry. I wanted to protect my armoured infantry as much as I possibly could with my armour. And so we advanced into the night. Now, there was no great plan or scheme of things. This was a clearance operation, and in the classic way, in advance to contact, we bumped into the enemy, and in bumping into the enemy, had to conduct a classic meeting engagement in the case of the 14th 20th Hussars, and in the case of the Royal Scots, much the same, in pouring rain, appalling visibility, pitch black, you couldn't see anything at all.
Our first formal objective was Brass, but actually as we were on our way there, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, we were moving east to our waypoint, where we were then going to move south into the rear of Brass, when we suddenly encountered some enemy which were totally unexpected. They started firing at us. We saw the heat spots from a long way out, and therefore I had to put in a very quick attack on this position. And that's where my square formation became very useful. I had 2 troops up in each of the forward 2 squadrons, and immediately the rear 2 troops moved up to meet them. So that was 28 tanks in the front row immediately firing. The 2nd squadron was there, and the company in reserve, with D squadron at the back. And I was up really central between the 2 front squadrons so that I could see what was going on. We were fired at by quite a lot of tanks. Indeed, I've got a shell case sitting over there which was fired at me. We then dissuaded the T-55 from doing that at about a range of 2,200 with a fin round, which went straight through its turret. As we moved forward, taking those tanks in layers, we discovered the position to be about 3 kilometres deep. It was, in fact, the headquarters of 57 Tank Brigade. The headquarters itself had already been evacuated, but the tanks were still there, a battalion minus, who were protecting that headquarters. We finished and reorganised at about first light.
We entered Bronze at about midnight. 3 minutes later, we had our contact. The challengers of the lifeguards contacted an enemy position. They fired Hesh and GPMG ammunition at it, and I brought up B Company to begin to effect an enemy surrender. Whilst B Company were effecting the surrender of the enemy, I then moved the squadron and A Company on to the next position. We'd found out exactly where that was by interrogating the Iraqi prisoners. My intelligence officer and myself both speak Arabic, and that was quite useful. We mopped up that position relatively quickly. We were getting more practiced at the whole thing, and I reconfigured the battle group to swing out of Bronze and then up towards our next objective, Brass. Just as we did so, we hit another infantry position, probably a company, and behind that, some 50 armoured vehicles. We asked Brigade if there were any friendly forces at that location, and they said no. We lased the position to make sure that it was we had the right grid reference, and we were told there were no friendly forces in that location at all. But it didn't seem right. We did not attack those vehicles, though we brought up our Milan and Challenger to do so, and instead assaulted the enemy position, which was only about a platoon strength. The 50 vehicles, it transpired, were dressing station 5 Alpha, who had actually got ahead of the BAA. And that's a problem. It's very difficult to identify vehicles at night, and through a TI sight, you certainly can't see red crosses.
By dawn on G+2, 4 Brigade is in position for the attack on objective Brass. To the north, the Scots Dragoon Guards are moving up to join the rest of 7 Brigade for the attack on Platinum. During the night, the 16th 5th Lancers had pushed forward in accordance with the artillery group's task to fight the depth battle, thereby removing the risk of the division being counterattacked from the northeast. By first light of G+2, they are ready to probe enemy positions on objective Lead.
We started the engagement by bringing in MLRS onto the objective. We were fortunate in that we had brought the MLRS up to a position about 20 kilometres behind us during the night. We cleared positions for them because we were unable to talk direct back to CRA at this stage. But we were able to talk direct to the guns, and so we were able to bring artillery fire in by that means. At the same time, we also had 2 A-10s allocated to us, and so we were able to bring those in onto the objective after the MLRS had started to soften it up. After the first engagements with both artillery and air, it was a bit like stirring up a hornet's nest, where the position really came to life, and enemies started to exit from the position in all directions, both going away from us and actually coming out to engage the squadrons. And by about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, all 4 squadrons were actually engaged in direct fire battles with the enemy. B Squadron and A Squadron QDGs with the enemy on the objective. C Squadron in the north had to beat off an enemy attempt to reinforce Lead. And then A Squadron in the south, who we thought perhaps would have a slightly quieter time, were actually extremely busy because they were picking up all the enemy armour which was retreating from Platinum and Zinc.
During the action on Lead, 2 unarmed M548s, crewed by REME personnel providing logistical support to the 16th 5th Lancers, come under fire from a T-55. 2 NCOs, both of the REME, are killed by machine gun fire from this tank. In keeping with the divisional plan to fight a sequential battle, following the depth attack on Lead by the artillery group, the point of main effort is switched to 4 Brigade for their attack on Brass, an area of 120 square kilometres estimated to be held in brigade strength.
As we crossed the start line at 8 o'clock, it was very windy. And that strong wind, coupled with the very heavy artillery that we were putting down, caused a great deal of obscuration. And it was sand obscuration, which meant that even the TI sight didn't work very well, and we were reduced to perhaps a visibility of 400 metres.
The assault on Brass takes only 2.5 hours. The Iraqis offer little resistance, and over 1,500 prisoners are taken, their will to fight sapped by the air attacks and artillery bombardments. 7 Brigade had planned a full 3 battle group attack on objective Platinum, but is this now necessary?
It was clear to us, having fought through for about 24 hours, that this enemy was not going to be robust. He was putting up token resistance, and therefore battle group commanders and myself worked out ways and talked the thing through as to how to get him to surrender without causing a vast amount of casualties. I'm not saying we put a brake on aggression, because that would have been a very dangerous thing to do. Then we could well have been caught by surprise. But when we went into Platinum, we put a battle group in on the west side, specifically to see whether we could cause the enemy to surrender. The whole brigade was ready to go in, and we had brought artillery and A-10s in first, just to make certain the situation was soft for us. But then we did start to take a huge number of prisoners, and it was very clear that we could clear Platinum by literally driving them into the east half and taking a surrender.
The battle group went down in a normal battle formation and cleared the enemy position, with the engineers following behind blowing up things. Because the sandstorm kept on coming down and lifting, you had a most peculiar situation. It was that when the sandstorm lifted, there was lots of, oh hell, look what's there, when a tank used to appear out of the mist. And certainly the engineers, for instance, when they were blowing up a T-55, turned round, found themselves being chased by other T-55. So you had this interesting situation of them getting back in their vehicles, running away like mad in their vehicles, followed by Iraqi tanks, followed by the mobile Milan that were chasing the T-55s, followed by Challenger doing the same thing. So it was a bit like wacky races at times. But this was a peculiar situation where the visibility went up and down from 100 metres up to about 6 miles in a matter of moments.
The limit of exploitation for the 1st British Division during G+2, the 26th of February, is phase line smash, to the west of the Wadi al-Batin, which marks the border between Iraq and Kuwait. For 7 Brigade, only objective lead now stands between them and phase line smash, and the point of main effort switches back to 4 Brigade, where the 3rd Royal Regiment of Fusiliers battle group is tasked with the clearance of objective steel. Once again, Iraqi resistance quickly crumbles, and the Fusiliers make rapid progress.
2 minutes past 3 on the afternoon of the 26th of February was the moment when we had reached the end of our attack on steel. We were starting then to reorganise. I was at the time with No. 2 Company, and we were supervising the rounding up of hundreds of enemy prisoners. And I received a report over the battle group net at about 5 past 3 that 2 of my warriors had been destroyed and that there were serious casualties. I immediately got back into my warrior and drove to the scene. And the initial reports that we'd received were such that we were convinced that it was either mines that we had stumbled across or some form of munitions on the ground that had somehow destroyed those 2 vehicles. So we approached extremely cautiously the scene of this incident, and I found these 2 destroyed warriors, one still burning very fiercely and secondary explosions still going off of the ammunition inside, and the other one a destroyed hulk nearby. It was a very ugly scene.
2 A-10 ground attack aircraft had mistakenly targeted the 2 warriors of C Company 3rd Royal Regiment of Fusiliers.
We was about 30 metres away in the wagon, waiting for the guns to be blown. And there was just a mass explosion which blew us back in the turret. And then when we looked out and seen the wagon had been hit, we moved round in front of the wagon to help the casualties.
9 men are killed and 11 injured in the most serious blue-on-blue incident involving the 1st British Division. Despite this tragedy, the momentum of 4 Brigades' advance has to be maintained, and preparations made for a night attack on their next objective, Tungsten. Prior to this action, however, 7 Brigade to their north is to assault remaining enemy positions on lead.
The situation on Platinum was one of a surrender, and of course that posed another problem, is how could we possibly cope with 2,000 prisoners of war and no prisoner handlers with us at that stage. So you get a logistic problem, and you get large quantities of prisoners being guarded by sappers and the like, while we went on to lead, and I was very keen to get on to lead before it became dark once again. And lead had been looked at carefully by the deep battle, if you like, by the 16th 5th during the course of the morning, and we thought that it was clear. Well, of course, when you get those sort of mindsets, you do get real problems. And when we took large surrenders coming in from the north in lead, that's when the moment the Staffords had this very tricky battle in the south of lead. And as they were taking surrenders from the north, they were fired on from the south.
As we were moving up there, we bumped into what we think is probably a battalion minus of Iraqis, something we weren't actually prepared for, we didn't believe was there. We don't know exactly what they're doing there, but we think they're probably guarding a road, because there was a hard-core road there leading north. And there were 2 actions on this. One, the battalion headquarters bumped into a whole lot of enemy, came under fire, but the most important action was over in C Company, who came under fire from the enemy. They returned fire, and there was a pause then to wait to see if they would surrender, because the idea was obviously not to kill a whole lot of people, and if you get people surrendering, so much the better. And they started to surrender, or the people in front started to surrender. What happened after that was some other Iraqis, which were off to the flank, who probably didn't see that their friends were surrendering, opened fire, and the battle started again. And this is when Private Malt was killed by an RPG-7, which hit him, went through him, and caught the vehicle on fire behind. And we had to start dragging out the crew and some of the minor burns. But the action went on for about 3 hours, from daylight into night time, and the C Company really had to clear a large set of bunkers and buildings, because there were a whole lot of low concrete buildings there as well. And they had to do that by the old-fashioned infantry way of dismounting grenades, bayonets, and in good old infantry style, with the warriors giving fire support. It was an unpleasant little 3 hours, because it wasn't something that was planned or intelligence had predicted, I suppose.
The situation was that 7 Brigades attack was going well, that they had cleared Platinum, and that they were advancing up to secure the line of smash, and that as far as I was concerned, my flank to the north of me was reasonably clear. That I was that night to attack Tungsten, and that I would be given detailed intelligence by the Divisional G2. Well, the detailed intelligence consisted of some centres of mass of enemy positions. I was also told that the pipeline, known as the tap line, which ran from Saudi Arabia to Basra, would form something of an obstacle to my progress. It was estimated as being, I think, 1.5 to 3 metres high above the ground, and it was something of concern to us. I needed 2 square battle groups, therefore we would need to regroup the 2 infantry battle groups, 2-2, and I gave orders to that effect. I also laid down that our line of departure would be just to the west of the Tap Line Road, and that would have to be secured by reconnaissance. And so I used, I think, for the only time in this war that close reconnaissance was used in its classic role, where I threw out a cloud of close recce at that very moment to get up and secure the line of departure. Secondly, to examine the crossings over the tap line, so there was engineer recce with it. And thirdly, to engage any enemy recce which could look out over the Tap Line Road, which is the road which runs parallel to this pipeline, just to the west of it.
We came to the night of G plus 2 and the morning of G plus 3. The situation was that I was up onto my limit of exploitation. I had a brigade dealing with the enemy in Tungsten, and that was 4 Brigade, and 7 Brigade in blocking positions against the possibility that the enemy would come down on us from the north, from the vicinity of Objective Nickel. I had no very clear idea of what was going on to my north with my fellow divisions of 7 Corps. The corps net, as indeed was the divisional net, was fragmented to say the least. And this as the result of the speed and distance we'd moved. I didn't know how the Egyptians were doing on the east side of the Wadi, and nor was I very clear as to the situation with the bypassed divisions and elements to my south.
The extent to which the overall coalition plan is succeeding at this time, while unknown to General Smith and the 1st Armoured Division, is revealed by General Schwarzkopf at a press briefing the following day, G+3, the 27th of February.
They would go. The Saudis continued to make great progress up on the eastern flank, keeping the pressure off the Marines on the flank here. The Special Forces went out and started operating small boat operations out in this area to help clear mines, but also to threaten the flanks here and to continue to make them think that we were, in fact, going to conduct amphibious operations. The Saudi forces that came in and took and Arab forces that came in and took these 2 initial objectives turned to come in on the flank heading towards Kuwait City, located right in this area here. The British UK passed through and continued to attack up this flank, and of course the 7th Corps came in and attacked in this direction, as shown here. The 24th Infantry Division made an unbelievable move all the way across into the Tigris and Euphrates Valley and proceeded in blocking this avenue of egress out, which was the only avenue of egress left because we continued to make sure that the bridges stayed down. So there was no way out once the 24th was in this area, and the 101st continued to operate in here. The French, having succeeded in achieving all of their objectives, then set up a flanking position, a flank guard position here to make sure that no forces could come in and get us from the flank. By this time, we had destroyed or rendered completely ineffective over 21 Iraqi divisions.
In the early hours of February the 27th, G+3, the 1st Armoured Division is poised to cross the Wadi al-Batin and enter Kuwait.
I decided to form a strong forward detachment out of 7th Brigade and to stop fighting the depth battle. My reasons for stopping the depth battle was that we had outrun our ability to collect targets and information. The CVRTs were slow or slower than the Warriors and the Challengers. They were sufficiently under-armoured that they were not in a position to stand the heat of battle in the same way as the other equipments, and added to which our other collection agencies, drone and sound ranging and so forth, were just not being able to keep up with the speed at which we were conducting this battle. So on that basis, we stopped fighting a depth battle. And 7th Brigade were reinforced with a small artillery group of 2 medium regiments and 6 MLRS. And they were going to be dispatched at any objective I was given and to go at best speed, and I would follow with the rest of the division.
And during the course of the night, we were given a number of orders, but the final one was to push over into Kuwait to Varsity. Now, the move to Varsity was very straightforward. The 16th, 5th in front of us initially, and then we were given a squadron of the QDGs back, which was lovely to have them back with us. And we used artillery just to look after our flanks. And we got into Varsity where we thought it was possible there was a Republican Guard brigade. But in the event, there was a lot of equipment there, but nobody manning it, and so we were destroying equipment. And then we come then to a rest the first time we had stopped. And the first time, incidentally, that I saw my battle group commanders, they came in, quick debrief, and waited then for further orders. And those changed on a number of times throughout the course of the night. 5 o'clock in the morning, we were given the order to move as quickly as possible to cut the Kuwait city to Basra Road. And we had to move some 50 kilometres, which we then did in about 2.5 hours. Now, that was a fascinating cavalry dash, if you like, and just being very slightly cautious, as there might have been somebody round the corner, but working in fairly dark conditions, because at that stage, of course, we were covered by the fires from the oil wells, which is something we hadn't really realised was happening, and almost sort of very unpleasant atmosphere we were moving through, with a lot of destroyed vehicles, particularly getting near the Kuwait City Basra Road.
On February the 28th, at 0500 hours GMT, hostilities are suspended.
I've got one message for the people at home today. It's this: get out there and ring your church bells.
Okay, now I don't want them embarrassed in any way, all right? No, sir.
After 7 months of Iraqi occupation and 6 weeks of war, the land campaign to liberate Kuwait takes just 4 days. In that time, the British 1st Division, for its part in forcing so swift an Iraqi surrender, has advanced a distance equivalent to that of the Channel ports to Berlin.
Lessons we learn from the past, we cannot learn too often. To succeed in the future, we must prepare ourselves now, equip ourselves now, train ourselves now, so that we're ready to respond in the future to fight the battles that lie ahead, whenever and wherever they occur. As we did in February of 1991, united in our determination and in our ability to fight and to win.